friends. Welcome to Beyond the News. I'm Jim Grant. You can check us out on Facebook at Beyond the News. Check me out on Twitter at Jim Grant Comedy. And check out our radio show and all our news links at beyondthenews.co.uk. Coming up today, I'm going to do something new. I'm going to play a clip of David Cameron at the United Nations, and he's talking about a variety of subjects, and I'm going to give you an alternative view to the subjects that he presents as and when. So we're going to basically, the show is dedicated to David Cameron's, and I don't think he's telling the whole story, and I'll give you a bit of background information on it, shall I? So here we go then. Let's start with David Cameron, UN speech, United Nations, David Cameron, and this was made, published on 24th of September 2014. So here we go. So I'm going to play David Cameron's speech. It's 15 minutes long, and oh, by the way, he ain't giving it to a lot of people, and you can see him when he pauses for a round of applause, and he ain't getting none. So here we go. Let's go through it, and I'll pause it and say, oh, well, here's the other side of the story, folks. So here we go. Oh. Let's get it back to the beginning, shall we? I'll just put the...
Honourable David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Madam Vice President, this year we face extraordinary tests of our values and our resolve. In responding to the aggression against one of our member states, the Ukraine...
I covered that on the show previously.
...in the Middle East, in dealing with the terrifying spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa.
Well, let's start there, shall we? Right, so we've covered it on previously shows, how the CDC, well, basically how the patent for Ebola came from the US government, but here we are, this little article from Western Journalism, and this is US government patented Ebola. Why? So again, it backs up what I was saying about the patent before. Who has the right most to gain by a worldwide outbreak of Ebola? Whoever can sell a solution to the problem, right? And just who might that be? Global pharmaceutical companies to the rescue. Who else might be interested in being perceived as a hero sent to rescue millions of damsel dudes in distress? Big government is here to protect you and control you, because with protection comes control. So, here's a doctor on Fox News, Dr. Gil Mobley, said on why the CDC is lying about Ebola.
I understand there have been calls to...
This is the CDC director, Tom Frieden.
...ban all travel to West Africa. The problem with that approach is that it makes it extremely difficult to respond to the outbreak. It makes it hard to get health workers in because they can't get out.
First of all, you could quite easily get military people to bring them back out. And secondly, hello, quarantine. It worries me that this guy doesn't know what that word is.
That from CDC Director Tom Frieden this week, fending off calls for a travel ban. Instead, he released new airport screening guidelines to keep travelers safe from Ebola. But is that enough to stop the virus from coming into your community? Dr. Gil Mobley says the CDC isn't being honest with Americans about the threat that's being posed by Ebola, and that the federal agency needs to do much more. He joins us now. Welcome, Doctor. Great to have you here today.
Thank you, Uma, for allowing me to get this message out.
Let me talk to you first about your concerns about what's taking place with the screenings at this point. Are you satisfied that the screenings that are going to be set up at a number of airports around the country will have an impact?
We need to be increasing the vigilance and increase screening. 1 million people right now on the continent of Africa are quarantined with Ebola, yet 10,000 fly out every single day on 35 non-stops around the world. Dr. Brantley said that this is a fire from hell, and the embers are spreading even as we speak.
Right now, with the efforts that are underway in the U.S., at least, do you think that it's going to do enough to try to raise awareness and to try to stop the spread here in this country by screening passengers at this point?
If we can stop one case, it'll make a profound difference. It took the Dallas Health Department 1 hour to be overloaded in tax, and the CDC 2 weeks later is still flying in planes loads of people. One patient, one person, one sick person that we could screen can make all the difference in the world. Yes, this will make a difference, and we were asleep at the wheel not having the policies, procedures, and protocol well in place before this moment.
Why are you raising concerns that the CDC needs to do more than it has to this point, that you feel that the public needs to have more information about this virus?
The CDC says that they've been planning for 7 months. Do you think they would have figured out what to do with the 55 gallons of hazardous waste with Ebola contamination outside of Emory University that sat for a week? What about Mr. Duncan's family members that sloshed around in blood, feces, and urine-soaked carpets for a week? They didn't figure out what to do. And the day I made my single action call to action in the Atlanta airport, they said fever screening wouldn't work, it's cumbersome, and they're not going to do it. After that stick kick on the hindsight, it took them 10 days, and thank God they're doing it today.
So yes, I know we have the video of you all suited up.
I'd like to just add there that there are people that have passed that screening process just by taking ibuprofen and getting their temperature down.
In the hazmat suit as you went through the Atlanta airport, because you were really upset about what was happening there, because you felt that more needed to be done to keep people safe in our country.
Yes, ma'am. We absolutely need to think outside the box. Mankind is threatened if this epidemic turns into a pandemic. Number one, keep Ebola out of the hospitals. A basic tenet of emergency medicine is not make a bad situation worse. That's when we arrive at a scene of a shooting, we're going to allow the guy to bleed to death in the street if it's not secured by law enforcement. We cannot afford to put highly trained personnel in the facilities at risk. This means fever evaluation centers, fever triage centers away from the hospitals, Ebola treatment centers away from the hospitals. If clusters start, we're not going to have ventilators anyway. We're not going to have central lines and vasopressors. We're going to be running out. We'll be lucky to have IVs and fluids. That means do like the state of Connecticut does. What they have done, they have instituted a state of emergency. We need to call out the National Guard, the reserves. Think MASH units if you don't have idle hospitals, and there are lots around as a result of acquisitions. We need to think outside the box, and for Christ's sake, stop all non-essential travel to West Africa. We don't have to stop the flights. Use the military to get the equipment and the personnel in and out.
I just want to say I'm not one for martial law or anything like that, so I disagree with that statement. Get the National Guard, but I am one for having Ebola centres. So, don't put the Ebola centres in with the suspected people. Don't put them in with the normal hospitals, because you're going to be exposing people with already low immune systems and ill people to one of the most potentially deadly viruses. And by that way, you can concentrate all your Ebola experts, because, a lot of the nurses and things like that are not going to be trained to this degree. Get all the experts under one roof and effectively keep quarantine zones there. But you don't need a National Guard. But yeah, do quarantine, do stop the flights. So anyway, so that's the Ebola one. So that's what they're not telling you about that. So, of course, David Cameron meets at Bilderberg with the people involved in pharmaceuticals and banks, and of course whenever you say pharmaceuticals, they'll be registered on the stock exchange, which will have investors from the banks within there. So all you need really to say is banks. So back to Mr. Cameron.
And in overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq.
Right, so now we're going to go the mortal threat of rise of ISIS in Syria and Iraq. So now we're going to go to Sybil Edmonds, FBI whistleblower, being interviewed by RT. And again, you say, RT, it's Putin. Doesn't mean he's wrong. But be under no illusion, he's no saint. And but what a sad state of affairs when Putin's media is reporting something which I believe is the truth. Doesn't make him a nice person, but don't make him wrong either.
Hello, welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shepard-Natze. As President Obama admits the rise of ISIS was never properly addressed by U.S. intelligence, terrorists threatened to carry out direct attacks on American soil. Is the U.S. ready to respond with more than just airstrikes? Former FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds is my guest today.
The sweeping wave of the ISIS advance came out of a clear blue sky, with American drones and satellites caught napping. How was it missed by the omnipresent eye of U.S. intelligence? How far will the West now go to combat it? And is the terror onslaught too strong to contain?
Former FBI whistleblower, author Sybil Edmonds is my guest today. Sybil, it's really great to have you on our show. So, when asked if the rise of ISIS was a surprise, Obama admitted the intelligence community underestimated ISIS in Syria. Did it not see it coming in Syria or Iraq?
Well, the answer depends on if you want to take President Obama or the U.S. authorities and their words and evaluate based on that.
Or David Cameron in this case.
I think the rise of ISIS is mainly about a brand change. Sometimes, as it happens in marketing, we get to see exactly the same principle within the geopolitical games that have been in play for a while now, especially since the end of the Cold War. And the Al-Qaeda brand began wearing off. And that brand now has been changed to ISIS, and as always by design. And considering the fact that we cultivated and put together and financed and created the ISIS, for me, it goes into one of those caricature or the funny statements that are put out by the mainstream media.
And if you doubt what she says, I did a whole thing maybe a year ago called beyondthenews.co.uk. Scroll down and there'll be a word. I put out in there Syria, and I put all the backing up of what she just said years ago. 2 years ago I did that. So you can see for yourself. So scroll down, do your own research. If you don't think what she said is accurate, and bear in mind she is Ushashezi is this woman. She's given a number of important testimonies before some important people. Do your own research and you'll see, what she's saying is accurate.
Statements issued by people like Obama or anybody from the State Department.
So what you're saying basically is it was expected for ISIS to turn into something so powerful, into a powerful group, but they're just not admitting to it.
Well, to answer the question briefly, it is ISIS is what is the U.S. media and the propaganda creators from behind the media decide to create. I mean, tomorrow or 3 months from now, we will start hearing from another name that we've never heard of, and within a month, they can make that the world's greatest or the most dangerous or threat. And again, that is the main concept here. And I know the mainstream media, U.S. media, the Western media, they have been playing it as such, but they did exactly the same thing with Al-Qaeda. I mean, Al-Qaeda was 100 people or 100,000 people or 10 million people. Another interesting perspective in this is that I refer to the brand change, and sometimes you have to switch the brand for the marketing purposes. And with ISIS, as you can look at and see from the term, from the name now, the brand created, the Western powers have gotten closer to just name and link the entire global terrorism to Islam. And that's another marketing strategy by the United States, NATO, and the main Western countries.
Okay. Well, once again, what we hear from the media is that President Obama blamed the chaos of the Syrian civil war for the rise of ISIS. At the same time, you have the United States. It doesn't hide that it's been helping the rebels in Syria from the very beginning. Did U.S. intelligence know who they were funding?
Absolutely. As they did in the 80s with the Mujahideens in Afghanistan, as they did with various so-called Islamic terror cells within Caucasus and Central Asia, as they did with Al-Qaeda, and this is no different. As I said, you're only looking at a brand change. You're not looking at any kind of a new phenomenon as far as the U.S. Global perpetual warfare is concerned.
Now, the U.S. is only ramping up support for moderate rebel groups in Syria, or so they say. So who works to determine if rebels are moderate or no? Is there really a way of knowing that?
Again, I mean, it is really difficult to talk around all these propaganda created by the Western powers through the mainstream media. And I feel like if I start even commenting on that, I'm belittling the facts on the ground. And again, I want to go back and provide the context and say, look, Mujahideens, which later became AKA Al-Qaeda's, they were the freedom fighters. So, and we have had similar situation in the Balkans during the war. You know, you had people that were, or the factions that were considered, you know, fanatics or criminal or terrorists, whether it was KLA, and then they became freedom fighters, they became our allies. And again, you're looking exactly at the same thing, different brand, but you're looking exactly at the same phenomenon. And we can talk around this and bring in all the different characterization put forth by the Western media, and then we can put it and compare it, what has been happening in the past 30, 35 years, and we'll see that the marketing strategy is the same, it's just a brand difference here.
Okay. What we're seeing right now is that U.S.-led airstrikes in Syria aren't stopping ISIS, well, at least not yet, and the Kurdish fighters on the ground are asking for ground support. Will the U.S. be sending troops to fight ISIS on the ground? What do you think?
Again, that's going to depend on various factors on what's going to happen. And again, I'm going to go back to context and history. The Kurdish factions and the Kurdish factor has always been used and played. The Kurdish faction and the Kurdish factor was the case when we had the war with Iraq. You know, we had the northern territory and the Kurdish area. Then we always get to, okay, what's going to be Turkey's role? Are they going to be wary of what's going to happen afterwards? If this happens with us and the Kurds, and again, you're looking at the same replicate of what we had in place, what was taking place during the initial stage of war against Iraq.
Mm-hmm. Because right now, the U.S. military actions in Iraq have one set of objectives, and then in Syria another. For example, Kurds in Iraq receive so much aid so quickly from the United States, unlike the Kurds in Syria. What is it, like two kind of brands of Kurds, like you say? Is it wise to assume two different strategies when fighting one enemy?
Absolutely. You have the Kurds in Iran, and you're looking at a totally different characteristics and where they stand within the. I mean, you're looking at there are over 25, 30 million Kurds, okay? And the Kurds in Syria, you have the Kurds in Turkey, you have the Kurds in Iraq, you have the Kurds in Iran. And right now, the game and the play being centered around the stage in Syria. And so we are looking at a different mechanism there than when we are looking at what's happening with the northern Iraq. And also you have to look at the oil factor. Okay, what do we have in Syria where the Kurds are concentrated versus what we have in northern Iraq, such as in such places such as Kirkuk? And well, do we have the oil factor in play there, or we don't have it there? So if you start putting those kinds of information that comes with each region and the different sects versus, let's say in this case, Kurds, and you're looking at several different factors in play. You're not looking at only one. So you're not looking at Kurdish faction and here are the Kurds and trying to basically put them all in the same bucket. It all depends on the geostrategic facts and what you're facing, what we have, what is in play, what is at stake. And then again, you can never compare northern Iraq with what's happening with Syria and the Kurdish region in Syria.
Yeah, because I was thinking maybe they're not helping the Kurds in Syria because they're affiliated with the Kurds in Turkey, and America maybe doesn't want to upset Turkey being one of its greatest allies. No?
No, not really, because you had exactly the same scenario with the Kurds in northern Iraq and the Kurds inside Turkey. And if you look at the border region and the cross-border activities between the Kurds in Iraq and in Kurds in Turkey, we had exactly the same situation. And this was one of the main reasons that Turkey did not want to allow United States using its air base during the early stage of the war against Iraq. It was about the Kurds in northern Iraq and how that would upset the equilibrium that the Turkish government wants to preserve and keep in place as far as the Kurdish faction is concerned.
All right, I got you. Now, the former CIA chief and ex-defense secretary Leon Panetta said the U.S. is looking at least 30-year war against ISIS, which is not at all what the White House is telling the public. Is he exaggerating? What's your estimate?
Well, I would say it's a very short period. I'm really surprised because we just talked about the brand change. The war against al-Qaeda was declared as a forever war, and it has been expanding. I mean, the war against al-Qaeda started with, it was supposed to be in Afghanistan, and we started chasing al-Qaeda in Yemen and Pakistan with all the drone attacks, al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the fact that this was going to be a forever war. And now that the brand has changed to ISIS, I'm very surprised that the former CIA director is stamping it with such a short time period. I believe 30-year period is very short, unless they have already in plan other sects or the other factions that they are going to declare the world's most dangerous terrorists. I would say it's a very short period of time. We currently are more interested in an ongoing, never-ending perpetual war. So I would say if you compare it with what we have been characterizing, or our government and the media, al-Qaeda, I would say I'm surprised that he has put such a short time stamp on ISIS.
Handy to have 30-year wars when your mates are involved in the military private contracting business, isn't it?
Considering the attraction or the attractiveness of the brand, because it has the word Islam built into it. And let's just forget al-Qaeda. I mean, al-Qaeda was just the noun, the name. And in this case, you're looking at a far-reaching implications when you declare the current greatest threat with an organization that has the word Islam built into it. And I think it's much more attractive to be used. So I would say, yeah, it should be forever. I'm surprised it's 30 years.
All right, Sybil, hold your thought there. We're going to take a short break right now. And when we're back, we'll continue talking to FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds about how powerful U.S. surveillance is when it comes to facing ISIS. Stay with us. And Turkey for helping extremists in Syria, but then he later apologized for his comments. But was he right?
Okay, so rather than dignify...
I'll just skip that back because I missed a bit and it's quite good.
Now, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden blamed Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey for helping extremists in Syria, but then he later apologized for his comments. But was he right?
Okay, so rather than dignify people like Biden, let's talk about, again, context and history. And I'm going to be repeating that, and I'm sorry if the viewers are going to say, how many times is she going to say context and history? Well, we actually, my website, our news organization was the first one to really break within the United States the training of the Syrian rebels in Turkey. And this was about 6 to 9 months before anything about Syria actually made it into the news. And using U.S. air base, and this is in southern Turkey, close to the border with the Syria. And it was NATO and the United States factions training and arming and sending them back, having them cross the border, rebels, long before actually it became news, Syria. And again, as I said, this was done in Turkey by the NATO's forces, mainly U.S. and British forces. And it was something that was planned and designed and implemented by the United States. So for Joe Biden to come and right now, putting this out, of course, he will get away with it because the mainstream media here, they're not going to go and revisit the facts that were exposed with the activities of U.S., what they did in Turkey, training these factions. I mean, now it's called ISIS. It's like French fries or the freedom fries. You're looking exactly the same fries at the same price. So that's all I'm going to say. It is just ludicrous. And then he took it back because it upset the current president in Turkey, Erdogan. And I wouldn't even find it really newsworthy, but it's funny.
Funny is the right word. Yeah, funny is the right word.
It is funny.
Why is it more important for Sunni countries like Qatar or Turkey to bring down President Assad than to contain extremism? Because you have Saudis and Qataris helping the anti-Assad rebels and the Turks asking Kurds to turn against Assad before they get any help with ISIS. Why?
In reality, if you're looking at the factual, objective analysis of it, really, it's not to their advantage whatsoever. I mean, you just name the countries. For example, Turkey is a member of NATO, and Turkey is greatly managed and directed by the United States, has been for several decades. There's no question about that. And when you're looking at United Emirates and the countries within the region, including Saudi Arabia, you're looking at the tentacles of the United States. I call them the tentacle nations. So if you start looking at saying, what is their advantage? Of course, there are no advantages, and you only look at disadvantages. If you start polling people within these countries, and I can speak to Turkey, for example, if you start getting the opinion polls in Turkey, you will see that over 90% of people in Turkey are against such moves. And Turkey had a pretty good relationship with Assad and with Syria. They engage in some really good level of commerce. And there has been zero advantage. They have to implement policies created, designed, and issued by the United States, by NATO, and that's what they are doing. So to answer your question, it has never been a question of any other nations, especially in the region, their interests or their advantages or even comparative advantages. It has always been about what is designed, what is put in place, what orders are issued here in the United States, and that's the end of it. And the other people's interest, the other nations' interest, is not even in the equation. It's never been. And if you ask the populace, people in those nations, they would actually nod and they would say, yes, that's exactly what they believe, because that's the reality.
All right, here's another possible and interesting turn of events. FBI Chief Mike Comey warned terrorists are working on an effort to attack the United States very, very soon. Is the U.S. ready to respond?
Okay, well, again, we have to look at different things and say why this statement was made. Is it based on some sort of facts and real solid intelligence gathered? Or is it the fact that for example, we have had for the TSA and for the flights, the threat level has been really low. And when that goes for a long time, people, they get antsy. They say, well, this is really annoying to have all these screens out there and going through them. We haven't had any terrorist threats, really. The level has not been blinking red or even orange. It's been yellow. Let's go through the rainbow colors. So it's time to re-energize the Americans with the fear of terrorism. We need to have more expenditure for things to put in place, because we can go ahead and increase the threat level.
Same of Britain, isn't it? Fear, threat level increased.
If you look at the stock market and look at the stock prices for all the military-industrial complex-related companies and firms, you will see how they have just gone up tremendously since the brand from Al-Qaeda switched to ISIS. And this is, again, the brand change I'm referring to. This is when you say, yes, now we can go ahead and produce and sell more to the government and spend billions more. So the same thing is true for the internal security, fear-mongering factors on the ground in the United States. It's time to re-energize that fear, and that's exactly what they are doing. And what's going to follow this is going to be more measures put in place, whether it's within the airports, or whether it's the hiring within the FBI or increasing the number of informants. Those are the things that are going to follow this announcement. We have to have more expenditure because of the public consent, because the fear level is going to go up, and therefore those expenditures are going to be justified. And it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. The FBI also says that dozens of Americans are believed to be fighting in Syria with rebel groups. How did that happen?
Well, it has to happen. Even if it's not the case, it has to happen, because you're looking at how ordinary Americans perceive these things. Well, think about it. Syria and this area, that region in Iraq, they are thousands of miles away. What can they do to us from there? So it's not enough to raise the terror threat and really do some heavy duty fear mongering. But if you bring some U.S. elements and ties in there, if we have Americans who are there, who are going to come back here and they're going to start, be our boogeyman here on the ground, and they're going to blow up buildings.
Same with Britain.
That's going to be marketing-wise more attractive. So it's going to be easier to sell to the American public the notion of our war against ISIS. We're not going to hear much of Al-Qaeda for a while. So Al-Qaeda is going to disappear and exit the stage, replaced by ISIS. So yes, that's another marketing strategy. If we start looking at some of these, what's happening, what has been happening, and what is being put forth by these people, including the former CIA director and the U.S. media, and if you start looking at it from the marketing perspective, we get to find more answers and understand what's going on rather than trying to approach this through some logical, political, philosophical, or even sociological analysis. And I think the best model that fits what's happening right now and explains it is the marketing model, and we should look at it as such.
Twitter is suing the FBI because it is not allowed to tell the public when the government asks for surveillance help. Why is surveilling Twitter such a big deal for U.S. government? Does so much really depend on Twitter and other social media?
No. Why surveilling all the Americans through NSA with their phone, every single phone conversation is such an important thing for the government? And again, I'm going to take us back and say, what kind of reaction from the public does this create? I mean, when we hear every day of how much is being gathered from the Facebook, it's true. And what's being gathered and collected and how people are being monitored through their Twitters, combined with what we have already known since 2000, 2004, 2005, the expose on NSA, you have a better chance of controlling the majority, controlling the people.
Sybil, can the FBI, CIA, NSA control their information, prevent it from gaining public attention? Like, what can prevent people like you, for instance, or Ed Snowden from speaking out?
Nothing. Nothing prevents people from speaking out. I have been speaking out. I don't think the U.S. government is really bothered. If the United States government is really bothered by people who are speaking out, people like myself or some credible, real whistleblowers, and if that becomes a real threat, it's very easy for them to take out those people, to eliminate them. And but they are not, because it hasn't risen to that level yet. If the reach were such, and if the consequences of people speaking out really reach the real masses and brought out, some reaction, then you would be looking at a totally different scenario, or the reaction or action by the U.S. government. But we haven't seen it yet.
Sybil, thank you so much for this wonderful insight and for your
Back to Dave. So that's ISIS. Yeah, he's going on about ISIS. We just covered that.
One region. It has murderous plans. We must tackle it together. Now, there is not one person in this hall who will view this challenge without reference to the past, whether in Iraq, whether in Afghanistan. Now, of course, it is absolutely right that we should learn the lessons of the past, especially what happened in Iraq a decade ago. But we have to learn the right lessons. Yes to careful preparation. No to rushing to join a conflict without a clear plan. But we must not be so frozen with fear that we don't do anything at all. Isolation and withdrawing from a problem...
Because his mates don't make money.
...like ISIL will only make matters worse. We must not allow past mistakes to become an excuse for indifference or inaction.
Yeah. please, you're learning the truth, and you're tired of war, and you're tired of paying for it, and you're tired of closing your hospitals and schools down to pay for it. Please still give us your money and your support.
The right lesson is that we should act, but act differently. We should be comprehensive, defeating the ideology of extremism that is the root cause of this terrorism, so that we win the battle of ideas, not just the battle of military might.
Basically, you figured us out, and we know it. And we're going to try and sell you a different idea.
We should be intelligent, supporting representative and accountable governments and working with them at their requests, not going in over their heads.
Well, speak to accountable governments. Well, look at the two people he picked to investigate the powerful elite paedophile network in Westminster. They were real accountable, weren't they?
We should be inclusive, working with partners in the region who are prepared to be part of the solution, potentially including Iran. And we should be uncompromising, using all the means at our disposal, including military force, to hunt down these extremists.
That our allies have funded, as Sybil Evans just broke down.
Take each of these in turn. The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism.
Really?
This is nothing to do with Islam, which is
Fair enough. All the Islamic people I know are good people.
a peaceful religion which inspires countless acts of generosity every day. Islamist extremism, on the other hand,
Are the people we seek out, fund and arm.
believes in using the most brutal forms of terrorism to force people to accept a warped worldview and to live in a quasi-medieval state. To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offenses, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it.
But all the arms and money that they sent them didn't really have much of an impact.
We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot.
Right. That brings us on nicely. 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot. No. I've never, ever said it was a Jewish plot because, in my opinion, it wasn't. It was a military-industrial complex plot. The military-industrial complex comprises mainly America, Britain, probably a couple of Israelis in there as well, I expect, but mainly American Britain, but by no means a Jewish plot. So let's have a look. But I like that. But, you know, he doesn't say inside job. He says, right, okay, we'll try and contain that. We'll say the Jews done it. Yeah. Anyone that questions the official narrative of 9/11 must say the Jews done it. Yeah. No, not at all. I question the official theory of 9/11, but I don't for 1 second say the Jews done it at all. I don't say anyone done it. I say the official narrative must be questioned, and I'm not the only one, which brings me on nicely to this little clip here. This is Richard Gage, an architect and engineer from August the 1st on 2014. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. This is on C-SPAN, which is the like the political type channel on in the American media. Very well respected sort of things. Like I don't know. Sort of BBC Parliament type kind of channel sort of thing in America. So here we are. This is Dr. Richard Gage questioning the official narrative without even mentioning that it was, some sort of Jewish plot. Which I like, it's Davies thing, isn't it? If you question the official narrative, you must be an anti-Semitic saying the Jews have done it. The way he just comprises that marketing package of it, I despise that, what David Cameron said, and I want to play this.
Center, with the destruction of all 3 towers on that day.
And what do you have doubts about?
Well, the architects and engineers that I represent have found evidence that has not been told to the American people by the agencies tasked with explaining these, the destruction of these towers. Evidence of controlled demolition, particularly with the third high-rise that collapsed on that day in the afternoon of 9/11, World Trade Center 7. We're looking forward to sharing with your viewers that evidence today.
That wasn't a controlled demolition by the Jews, was it? It was just controlled demolition. And I'd like to point out at this point that all the Jewish people I know are really, really cool, and I think they'd be offended at, what David Cameron remarks had said. I think if I was Jewish, I'd find that offensive.
Well, let's look at a little bit of video that your group has put out, and you can explain it after we see it.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
That's the building falling 3 foot through its own footprint.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Mr. Gage, that was Building 7. Dan Rather narrating on CBS Live.
It sure was. And most Americans are completely unfamiliar with this. In fact, architects and engineers around the world, mostly all unfamiliar with the third worst structural failure in modern history. I mean, here is a 47-story skyscraper. At 5:20 in the afternoon, it drops like a rock, and I mean this fast. Free fall acceleration, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, as you saw. Now, a building with 40,000 tons of structural steel cannot fall straight down like we saw due to normal office fires, the official reason given us by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, without all 80 columns on each floor being removed simultaneously and then synchronistically timed floor by floor. So, Peter, we've seen this like the old hotels in Las Vegas, and as our viewers just saw, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. But NIST tells us, no, this came down due to normal office fires. So you can begin to see the problem right off the bat. Normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper ever before. We have steel-framed, fireproofed skyscrapers for a very good reason, and they have protected our towers for a long, long time. So the 2,200 architects and engineers that I represent around the world in over 300 presentations now in 32 countries and 8.
And not once have I heard any of them say, or not once have I ever been in a conversation with any person that questions the 9/11 conspiracy. Not once have I ever heard any of them say, the Jews done it. It was a Jewish conspiracy. I've never heard that, and if I heard someone say that, I would point out and say, no. Incorrect, and quite an unpleasant thing to say as well.
The two American cities, they present the evidence for the explosive demolition, and that evidence is seen not only in the videos of the buildings, but it's heard by the first responders who cite the explosions in this building's destruction, who cite the pools of molten iron flowing like lava, they say. And in fact, Leslie Robertson himself, the World Trade Center structural engineer, cites a river of steel flowing. Now, these are evidence of temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Office fires can't even get 1,000 degrees short of that. So we have a serious problem, very serious, in the accountability under the official story of those extremely high temperatures and evidence of molten iron, documented by FEMA itself in the first report Appendix C in the FEMA report, May of 2002, which documents hot sulfur corrosion. In fact, the author of that report, Jonathan Barnett, says the ends of the beams were partially evaporated. That takes 4,000 degree temperatures. The only thing that we're aware of that can create that is thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And there are patented cutter charges that do just that with thermite. So this is why we have to have a real investigation that looks at the evidence that NIST has ejected from the report after they came in 2004 and threw away the FEMA report.
Now, Richard Gage, NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology, is it? I believe?
That's correct. Yes.
You're talking about their report. Now, you question the falling of Building 7, the way it fell. Are you questioning how the Twin Towers fell as well?
There are very serious questions about the Twin Towers. Once we look at World Trade Center 7, which most people don't know anything about, and see how obvious the free-fall symmetrical destruction is, and how that matches exactly a controlled demolition, and how the official story cannot possibly be true, we're ready then, maybe, to take a look at the other subject that you bring up, the Twin Towers, with a little bit more of an open mind, because most of us feel like we know how the Twin Towers came down because we have been given the official story. Most architects and engineers don't even question the story that NIST has provided. When they do, however, see the evidence in the Twin Towers, like Building 7, they do end up agreeing with us by a show of hands, overwhelmingly, and many of them sign our petition. Again, 2,200 architects and engineers now demanding a real investigation. So that evidence is certainly available in the videos. For instance, of the North Tower, we're told that this upper block of 10 stories, 15 stories above the point of jet plane impacts in the North Tower, that upper block drove the rest of the building down to the ground. We have a few problems with this story, however. Chiefly, that's not what the videos show whatsoever. That upper portion is destroying itself before there's any downward motion to drive the rest of the building down to the ground. In the first 4 seconds, it's completely destroyed, liquefied, if you will. The structure is completely shattered. There's nothing left to drive the rest of the building down. And yet what we see after 4 seconds is exactly what the first responders are describing, hundreds of them, in the oral histories taken and documented by Thomas von Essen, the fire commissioner. They say, pop, 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 all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. They're describing explosions, they're hearing explosions, they're explosions throughout the building, yet none of these hundreds of eyewitness testimony of explosions are included in the official report. But what we see is, like they describe, a belt. All these explosions laterally driving 4-ton perimeter wall sections, structural steel sections, laterally 60 miles an hour in every direction, landing 600 feet away. Isolated, freely flying structural steel sections. This takes an incredible lateral force, up to enough force to eject or fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. We also see explosions below that.
Mr. Gage, I apologize for interrupting. I just want to let our viewers know we're going to take a lot of phone calls, and we're going to begin that in just a second. We invited Mr. Gage on this program because from time to time regular viewers of the Journal know that we get phone calls asking about Building 7, regardless of what segment we're talking about. And so we thought we'd investigate this group and give them a chance to have their say. And I want to start with this tweet, Mr. Gage, and it kind of goes to the why. And this is Jim at Lake Gaston. Who gains from this building falling? Why would someone want to demolish it?
I think criminal investigators who are trained at looking for suspects in such massive criminal controlled demolitions like these obviously were, have to be employed to look at the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Who benefited? Cui bono? These are the questions that enterprising journalists and criminal investigators should be asking, but in large measure are not, for whatever reason. The architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are tasked with the what. And those questions you ask, why, have to also be answered by those who are trained to find suspects with motives and find the motive too.
Let's take some calls, Mr. Gage. Max in Milford, Indiana. Please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, C-SPAN, for having Mr. Gage on to tell the inconvenient truth about 9/11, because our whole foreign policy and much of our domestic policies today are all based on 9/11. And there are so many questions to be asked and answered about 9/11, like, where is the airplane debris at Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Where are the 4 black boxes from the airplanes? Why did the Bush administration fight an investigation? Why did the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 collapse? Why were military and political people told not to fly? Who scheduled the hijacking war games on 9/11? Where was NORAD? Who told them to stand down? These are just a few of the questions that need answering. Thank you.
Well, I agree with the caller. These are some serious and very important questions that Americans, millions of them, are asking, but not getting enough airtime. And we appreciate C-SPAN's dedication to journalism and finally focusing on this subject, because after all, 2 wars were started as a result of 9/11. We've lost 6,000 soldiers. 1 million people in the Middle East have been killed in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've lost precious civil liberties through legislation, and our economy has been wrecked. If there's any question about what happened at the World Trade Center and the other questions the caller is asking about, then we've got to have a real investigation.
Richard Gage, next call for you comes from Alice in Morganville, New Jersey.
Hi, thank you. Everything you are saying is questions I have as somebody who worked there for 24 years and was there for the 93 incident. Nobody ever brings up Giuliani. We had Philippe Petit walked between the buildings, yet the mayor, the biggest mouth, never said after the first building was hit, clear out the second building. I don't care what size plane that they thought it was. Or with the president reading My Pet Goat. So please continue to investigate. I lost so many dear friends. I wasn't working any longer at the Trade Center. Thank you.
Richard,
thank you. I do appreciate the additional questions raised by the callers today. Of course, our focus is on the science of what happened. We want to know, how did 400 structural steel connections give way every second during the 7-second free-fall collapse of World Trade Center 7? Their computer animation that NIST made to prove how their theory developed, that is the buckling of column number 79 at the 12th floor where the worst fires were said to be. However, those fires were burned out over an hour before the building ever collapsed. So they could not have caused the thermal expansion that NIST cites as initiating this collapse. NIST also has a serious problem in fabricating evidence and not including key structural components in their computer model, which they will not release, citing that it would jeopardize public safety were they to release the computer models and the structural drawings for Building 7. In fact, the architects and engineers like us who are responsible for public safety have to have this information, of course, in order to ensure that public safety.
Now, Richard Gage, National Institute of Standards and Technology, after their investigation of Building 7, put out a full report, and it, when you read it, it seems pretty frank and open. In fact, they ask themselves questions, or they ask the questions and then answer them, such as, is it possible that thermite or thermate created to the collapse of World Trade Center 7? Their answer in here is to apply thermite to a large steel column. Approximately 1.13 pounds of thermite would be needed to heat and melt each pound of steel. For a steel column that weighs approximately 1,000 pounds per foot, at least 100 pounds of thermite would need to be placed around the column, ignited, and remain in contact with the vertical steel surface as the thermite reaction took place. This is for one column. Presumably, more than one column would have been prepared with thermite if this approach were to be used. It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected either prior to 9/11 or during that day.
Well, the question, one of them, would be who would be detecting this? Of course, we want an investigation of the security company under whose noses would have to have been brought several tons of thermite, as a matter of fact. Now, the question, the answer is quite cute, actually, because they completely ignore the patented thermite cutter charges, which issue thermite through a channeled device, issuing in milliseconds molten iron cutting through structural steel. This is very well documented, and you don't just pour thermite against a column. It has to be contained and directed in cutter charges. So we'd be looking for that evidence. In fact, what we see, what FEMA documents, is molten iron. In fact, molten concrete as well, which takes 3,000 degrees of temperature. Where does that come from? It can only come from thermite, an incendiary used by the military, again, to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So the evidence is there for thermite, and patented cutter charges are, in fact, made with consolidated thermite. All that would be left is molten iron. And indeed, that's what's found in the basements of the Twin Towers, in the debris pile under World Trade Center 7, and it was not included in the official report by NIST, comprising 1,000 pages of obfuscation and actually lies.
Next call for Richard Gage. Eric, Antioch, California.
Hi, I'd just like to say that I really enjoy C-SPAN, and there's been a lot of callers a lot of times that I've heard calling about this issue, and I'd like to thank C-SPAN for allowing this to come up, and congratulations to all the people's calls finally bringing it forward. And that's all I have to say.
We'll move on to Cologne, Germany. This is Sinan calling in from Cologne.
Yeah, hello.
We're going to leave it there. We're going to go back to David Cameron just for our last minute because there's something quite spooky he says.
London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear. To defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism.
This is the scary bit.
For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our countries. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism.
So there you go. You question 9/11 or 7/7, you're a non-violent extremist. With our final article here, extremists to have Facebook and Twitter vetted by anti-terror police. And that was just after David Cameron's speech. Sweet, huh? Well, this has been Jim Grant. I don't know whether I'm an extremist now or not. I'm certainly don't think 9/11 was a Jewish conspiracy, but I think there was a conspiracy involved. So who knows? Maybe I'll be back. Maybe I'll be dragged off to a cell as an extremist. But it's okay. It's compatible with intellectual inquiry and freedom of speech, David Cameron says. So don't worry, it'll be fine. Beyondthenews.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening. Cheers. Bye-bye.